folk horror film recommendations that are sure to get your rituals flowing. If you've been dipping your toe into folk horror, let me take you through some of my favourite films of all time from the genre, from old to new, from gentle to wow, that person's on fire. Hello, if you're new here, I'm Sinead. This is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I talk about spooky books, spooky films, and spooky things that I may have seen throughout the day. Having done 2 whole videos talking about folk horror in books, I think it's time that we go to the big screen and share some of those fantastic films that have defined the genre and continue to terrify us with nature today. If you happen to wander into my house one day, you would see imagery from all sorts of folk horror films all over the place. It is a genre I absolutely love. Many people have requested this video from me, so I am delighted to bring it to you. I've even put on my little pagan ritual dress for you. That's how committed I am. If you're interested, please do check out my other videos talking about the history of folk horror in literature with some excellent book recommendations, if I do say so myself. I'm going to be talking about the films. I'm not going to have a lot of clips on screen, but it's very easy to find clips and excerpts for any of the films I've mentioned. I will have images up just to give you a taster. So let's set the scene. What is folk horror? There are all sorts of tropes with folk horror films, and there's always exceptions to the rule. Folk horror films are often focused on the land and on the past. They're frequently set in rural communities and involve individuals or communities that are either from the past or are fascinated by it. You have people embracing pagan practices or folkloric practices that are appropriate to their ancient cultures, the sort of thing that is firmly rejected by the church or people with modern sensibilities. There could be some rituals, there could be some sacrifices, there could be offerings or prayers to the old gods, and generally this is a way of currying favour and maintaining control over their lives in the face of great hardship. You may have witches being ostracised or hunted. You may have people performing brutal sacrifices as a way of appeasing the old gods and ensuring a good harvest, or people bartering with old entities for personal gain. The common thread through folk horror is the land and nature. The magic or forces or entities that are being conjured or being channeled in these films come from the soil, they come from the roots of the trees and the greenery around them, and they're not always happy at being disturbed. As you can imagine, you've got a lot of battle between church and perceived paganism, and you will have a lot of blood. Folk horror belongs to all cultures, and it can take many different forms. And I'll start off with a warning. Folk horror is really bloody. It's gory, it's brutal, it deals with pretty horrific subject matter in some cases. It does not pull any punches, so if you are squeamish at all, be prepared when going into it. And as I've mentioned before, when talking about books as well, sometimes folk horror will deal with sacrifice and there's some animal harm in it. You might want to dive onto the website Does the Dog Die to really check your comfort levels with any of the films that I'm mentioning. Where do you start with folk horror? You start with the Unholy Trinity. It is the 3 films that are seen as the defining moment in folk horror cinema, even though there are films from different cultures that predate it. You have The Witchfinder General, 1968. You have Blood on Satan's Claw, 1971. And my personal favourite, The Wicker Man, 1973. All 3 of these films will give you a fantastic grounding of where folk horror has come from, and so many of the tropes that are channeled in modern films and modern books. 2 of these films, Witchfinder General and Blood on Satan's Claw, are set in the past. With Witchfinder General, it is a highly fictionalised OTT portrayal of the Witchfinder, Matthew Hopkins, and his reign of terror across the land in trying to rout out and find witches. Spoiler, there were no witches, it was just massive amounts of misogyny. Blood on Satan's Claw is a more fantastical tale, and it is equally brutal and bloody and unpleasant, but looks spectacular even though it is grim. It is set in the 18th century, where a rural community find the remains of a very strange collection of bones and a skull, and it ain't right, buried in a field. That unleashes all manner of horrors. It's a very lurid film, both in its subject matter and its appearance, but The Wicker Man remains one of my favourite films of all time. It is a story of a policeman who is sent to an island off the Highlands of Scotland to search for a missing girl. The policeman is a very devout Christian and doesn't tolerate any of the nonsense that he encounters when he gets to Summerall. Summerall, which is populated by carefree, happy individuals who are indulging in pagan practices. They are all committed to the harvest, which is so important to their island, and they will dance around the maypole. The children sing songs about fertility, and they are not taught the Christian ways, much to to the policeman's horror. But as he is searching for the child, he is encountering opposition and finding that the locals are behaving very strangely towards him as they build up to one of their harvest celebration days, and things get difficult. I won't spoil the film for anyone who has not yet seen it, but I urge you from the bottom of my heart to watch The Wicker Man if you are at all interested in folk horror. If you're interested in modern folk horror and you want to see where it came from, Wicker Man is the one. It is dated. It has some very weird editing glitches in it as well. There's so many stories behind the making of that film that make it so fascinating. Outstanding performances by Edward Woodward and Christopher Lee, and that iconic ending. That is the imagery of the Wicker Man that I have all over my house. It is all around me right now. People keep buying me sketches of the Wicker Man. If you know, you know. And I have so many of them in my house, people are frightened when they come round for tea. They should be. That's the Unholy Trinity, but another film I'd like to throw in is even older than that. It is the Japanese film Onibaba from 1964. I remember watching this film when I was a film student and studying film theory, and it has stayed with me ever since. It is a story of a mother and daughter in 14th century, I believe it is, Japan. They are living out in the wilderness and they are laying traps for soldiers who wander off the beaten track. They kill these soldiers and steal from them so they can survive. Yeah, pretty brutal. Into their life, though, wanders a young man whom the daughter falls for and begins a relationship with, much to the jealousy of the mother. And the mother starts using old ghost stories and folklorish tales to try and win her daughter back and scare away her opposition. But it channels a lot of really interesting Japanese folklore and makes for a very atmospheric, very tense, and very beautiful film. It is well worth a watch if you can access it. There's also an older film called The White Reindeer. It's not one I've seen. I haven't seen that yet, but that is often cited as one of the great original folk horror films. Do check it out. Those are your little bits of history homework, if you want to call it that, but they're still immensely enjoyable films. A big hitters by the brilliant Roger Eggers, it is The Witch. The Witch is an incredibly dark, beautiful, bleak, barren, brutal, iconic film, and I loved it. Set in the 1600s, you have a family living in a Puritan society. They have been ostracized by their community and are living on the outskirts of a village right next to a deep dark wood where it is said a witch dwells. The family encounter multiple hardships, including the loss of their baby boy that is stolen by the witch. The family are tormented by external forces and also their own misery and their breaking faith, while you have these creatures and these beings slowly making a play for the different people in the family to bring them over to the dark side. As you could imagine from Roger Eggers, who directed the recent Nosferatu remake, this is a very beautiful film. It is very dark and bleak looking. This is a barren landscape where people are really trying to rely on the land to give them sustenance, to give them their path to heaven, and it just fails constantly. And it's actually the far older gods, the far older people of the woods and the darkest of them all who are thriving. If you've ever wondered who Black Phillip is, this film will explain. You do need to be prepared for The Witch because it has some very brutal imagery, some very upsetting scenes in it. It never feels overly gratuitous, in my opinion, in comparison to some films that I will mention, but it is very stark and it feels very believable. Roger Eggers is known for the amount of research that he puts into his films, so you do really feel like while watching it that you are watching a slice of 17th century miserable existence, but with witches. A great film I highly recommend. From the darkness to the absolutely sun-soaked multicolour explosion that is Midsommar. Midsommar, a film that came out a few years ago, and this is the bright side of folk horror, but it is no less brutal, it is no less horrible, it is no less mental, quite frankly. Midsommar is a story of a young woman, Dani, a student, who goes with her boyfriend with whom she is literally on the last legs of her relationship. They and some friends go to the home village of one of their friends in Sweden. This beautiful, luscious, huge landscape where everyone celebrates a 9-day midsummer festival. Danny has experienced horrific loss that you are confronted with at the beginning of this film. Coming on this journey, the whole group find the community there so happy and so smiling, but so strange. They perform bizarre, bloody rituals that they explain is just part of their way of life and the circle of life itself. But the longer they stay there, we come to understand that the community may have a different intention for different members of the group. And you're left wondering, who's going to survive this little summer holiday? I love Midsommar for its beauty, for its brutality, and for not descending into OTT slasher territory. It would be very easy to take a setting like this of a lovely community that are doing a lovely festival and turn it into just a gore fest. It is very gory, but what happens to each of the people, they are all sort of brought into different rituals and different strange practices, and everyone responds differently to it. Some people embrace it, some of them are reticent, some of them are straight out freaked out, as you probably would be when you see the film and see what happens. And it builds to an absolutely brilliant climax. It is a film about death and about grief, how different people process their emotions and feel your feelings. There are some absolutely batshit scenes in this, I won't lie. There will be bits in it you'll be going, what? But I personally love it, and I think it is such a great, bright slice of true folk horror. Back to the darkness briefly, let's go on a big trek through another forest. There's a lot of forests in folk horror. It is the outstanding film, The Ritual, based on Adam Neville's brilliant folk horror book, The Ritual. This is a story of 4 friends who have experienced a tragedy, the loss of one of their other friends, and they're going hiking across the beautiful landscape of Sweden. This is a much darker Sweden than Midsommar. They end up having to take a shortcut through a huge, big, dense forest. And, you know, the minute they get into the forest, it's not looking particularly welcoming. This is not a pretty forest. This is creepy as hell. It doesn't take them long to start seeing very strange effigies in the trees and start seeing evidence of maybe some animal sacrifice and some bones. And okay, the further they go, the greater the horrors increase. It feels like they are being stalked. They come across different shacks and buildings, and these all have their own horrors inside them. And it does seem that there is something and some people in the woods who would really like to get hold of this group. One of the strongest things about The Ritual is its portrayal of male friendships in this little core group. These aren't all macho young boys who are going to fight their way out of any hardship. These are guys in their 30s, in their 40s. They are battling with each other and their own internal demons and trying to hold their friendship together. And you really see their vulnerability and their weakness as their terror increases. And it feels very real and it feels very authentic. And also the look of the film and the horrors they face are gut-wrenching. It is so tense, and the tension is kept really taut all the way through the film until you find out what is actually happening, and it is increasingly horrible and crazy. But it does feel authentic. It never actually feels over the top for such a dramatically horrifying film. The Ritual is 100% a film to watch, and do check out Adam Neville's books because he is a great horror writer. I'm going to jump back into something more colourful and something more fairy tale-like. I am going to slip this film in here because I do think it squeezes into the folk horror category. Even though it's more of a dark fairy tale, it's one of my favourite films of all time. It is The Company of Wolves. Now, this is a film in the 80s. It is a take on the Red Riding Hood story, and it's based on Angela Carter's book, The Bloody Chamber, where she took the old fairy tales, like Red Riding Hood, like Bluebeard, and she rewrites them. And she rewrites them with a more adult eye, with her wonderful, wonderful prose and eroticism as well. The Bloody Chamber is absolutely fantastic. Read it. It's very short. The Company of Wolves takes her story of Red Riding Hood, and she wrote the screenplay as well. You have a young girl who's actually dreaming in the modern day, but she is dreaming of this medieval fantasy village in which she lives as the Red Riding Hood figure, and the village is being stalked by wolves. People are attacked in the village, including her own sister, and she learns the different folkloric tales of men who walk on all fours, who howl at the moon, whose eyebrows meet in the middle. It is a wonderful fairy tale. It is a werewolf film, but it's all about the old lore and the old folk tales and turning them on their head and giving you a different perspective of it. It looks very good. You've got some great gruesome transformations and very gory bits in it, but it does feel like an old grim fairy tale. It is incredibly effective. I urge people to enjoy it. Right, we're going back to the darkness with the next film, Apostle. Now, this absolutely ticks the boxes of folk horror. It is folk horror through and through. I would be remiss not to include it. Did I love this film? I don't know. It is probably, weirdly, the most brutal of all of the films on my list, on this list. That gives you a hint of where we're going here. It isn't without its flaws, without its notes, but if you want really kind of visceral folk horror, dark folk horror, you're gonna get it with Apostle. Apostle is a story of an island community where no one from the outside, from the mainland, is able to go to without very special permission. A man played by Dan Stevens is able to get onto the island because he's looking for his sister. His sister has disappeared. He thinks she has been taken on the island. She may be being held against her will. The island is ruled over by 3 brothers who were escaped convicts, and now they manage the community and they preach to them. But when our stranger arrives, and as he's doing his investigations, there are strange signs around the island of maybe something not of this world enacting, blood trickling in different places, strange rituals that all the people perform. And as the story progresses, we see not only that there is something otherworldly on this island that the men are trying to harness the power of, but we also see the brutality of the men in their community and their fight for control and their fight for power. There are some incredibly brutal scenes in this. The trial and the punishment that one character receives, without giving too much away, Jesus Christ. Good Lord. Brace yourself for it. I personally did not love the conclusion of the actual folk horror, folkish supernatural element to this story, without giving anything away, but it has the vibes all the way through it. I'll leave it to you guys to make your judgment. Gonna throw it back here, throw it back to a film that is 100% a folk horror, and it never really was labelled this at the time because it was part of such a huge moment of pop culture. It is the Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project that came out in the 90s, and it is a found footage horror film about a trio of young filmmakers who wander into the woods in the search of the Blair Witch, but the Blair Witch finds them and torments them. It is a folk horror story of people wandering into the woods, not paying respect to the spirits that live there. It was such a seminal film at the time. It inspired parody after parody. It inspired so many pastiches and so many knockoff films that tried to recreate that tension that people felt when they first saw the Blair Witch Project. I saw that film before it came out. Someone got me a copy of it, this little illegal copy that was being passed around, and I didn't really know anything about it, and I watched it alone in the dark at home, and I remember being terrified by it. It really was a moment in time because back then when it came out, there weren't a lot of found footage horror films out. They existed, of course, but nothing to that scale, and it was marketed so well and the hype around it worked. And another lesson of why you should never go into a shack in the woods. Next is a film that I think deserves a lot more love, a brilliant horror film and a fairly recent one from Ireland. It is You Are Not My Mother. Now, this is a slight exception to the folk horror rule because it is not a rural film. It is not based in the woods or it's not based in the countryside. It is based in a domestic, modern setting. It is very dark and very dour. It is a story of a young girl and her mother who is suffering from crippling depression. But she starts to suspect that her mother may no longer be her mother. This is part of the changeling lore where the fairies can swap. It's generally a baby, but can swap a person with a fairy that looks exactly the same, but has ulterior motives and is not the person that you thought they were. There are so many good books about changelings. There are great films. There are true crime cases over history of people who were so convinced that someone in their household had been taken by the fairies and a doppelganger had been put in their place that they ended up killing them. They're true stories. I love this film, the fact that it takes the changeling lore and applies it to someone who is not themselves, to someone who is suffering and is depressed and is a shadow of their former selves. So you start to wonder, who are you really? But then throws in this horror element of what if they're not? What if they're really not? And it plays with the mind a lot. Is it all in their head? Is it imagined? And it's a great example of folk horror because it is so bedded in the folklore of Ireland and this folkish story and the rituals that you need to enact to protect your loved ones and to get rid of the people who have crept into your home. And it builds to a great climax. Please check out You Are Not My Mother, a wonderful film. The director, Ben Wheatley, is responsible for a collection of very, very well loved and very striking folk horror films. You have Kill List, you have A Field in England, and you also have In the Earth. For some reason, I have not gotten around to watching Ben Wheatley films, and it is to my fault, but it would be completely remiss of me not to mention him as a hugely important folk horror director today. I will also give a shout out to a few people who keep mentioning this film, The Devils by Ken Russell, Oliver Reed film, that it is absolutely mental. It is a folk horror film. It is so over the top and not okay. I don't know how I could tell anyone in good conscience to go and watch it, because it's very of its time and it's absolutely crazy. Go have a look at it. Go have a look at it, and if you feel comfortable. I'm also going to throw in a small shout out for a TV series that came out last year. It was The Red King, and this was available on Alibi in the UK. I think it was screened on ITV as well. It is the story of an island community that is very close, keeps their secrets close to heart, but someone has gone missing. There's been a murder, and a policewoman who has been disgraced from her profession ends up working on this island, and secrets are being hidden, and there's strange rituals and there's strange things going on. It very much harks back to those old kind of Wicker Man vibes. The Red King, decent, worth a watch. There's a rundown of some of my favourite folk horror films, and a couple in there that I have not seen or maybe don't love, but they absolutely nail the brief. If you have your own favourite folk horror films that you want to comment about, particularly any folk horror films from different countries and in different languages, I would love to hear about them. Drop them in the comments, let me know your thoughts. And if you are going to talk about any key elements of the films I've mentioned and they contain spoilers, just put the word spoilers in your comment and drop the information further down. Then we'll all have a look. Please do subscribe if you would like me to keep bringing you more spooky content, be it books, be it films, be it things that chase me through fields at moonlight. Stay spooky.